heeft verteld over playification.
Het wordt echt superleuk, dus kom vooral.
Geacteerd.
Wat is de datum?
Sorry, 14 november. Donderdag 14
Zet
november.
ik hem alvast.
Hartstikke goed.
Wil je dat spelen dan acteren?
Nee,
Gamen.
spelletjes, maar dan...
I started using Drupal when frames were fine and Flash was cool. Not Drupal, by the way, sorry. Started using Drupal 8 when Drupal when it was version 8, because the modernization of how Drupal worked was a moment for me to say, well, this could be cool and nice to work in as a developer also, without learning 10 years of old Drupalisms and stuff you don't really see at other places in PHP. So, fast forward to now, I work at Swiss, technical director. Swiss creates digital experiences and supports Drupal, Laravel, and multiple front-end frameworks. Our client base spans multiple sectors and sizes, and getting the communication between different systems right is essential in creating sustainable architectures. So this is where JSON API comes in. On the homepage of JSON API, they say if you've ever argued with your team about the way your JSON API, your JSON responses should be formatted, JSON API can be your anti-bike shedding tool. You might think, bike shedding? What? So, bike shedding. Back in the 50s, a guy named Parkinson made the argument that members of an organization put too much weight on trivial issues. So, when they were approving the plans for a power plant, they would discuss the color of the bike shed instead of the things that really matter. So this eventually led to the term bike shedding, where we spend too much time discussing the wrong things. So I see this happen all the time. Getting interoperation right between systems is hard, and a lot of time is wasted talking about how we should communicate, or how the API should look, or how the different systems should be talking to each other. So I'd say any color will do, really. So guys, stop talking about the color of your bike shed, because we love our jobs, we love talking about architectures, and we love talking about innovative solutions to problems. Conducting multiple systems is fun. I mean, a lot of people see that as the most fun thing to do nowadays if they're building web applications. But discussing the structure of an API or how to talk to each other, for the gazillion time, not so fun, really. So this is where JSON API solves the problem. It tells you how your JSON API, the JSON responses should be structured. So there's no need anymore to talk about the structure of your responses, and you can talk about the things that really matter, and that's the problem you are solving. So I'm going to do a very short history of the JSON API. In 2013, a guy named Yehuda Katz thought it up. He was the creator of Ember.js and was in the Rust core team. He was a Ruby on Rails and jQuery core teams. So he knew what he was doing. And the Ember data transport REST adapter was the basis of JSON API. The goal of that adapter was eliminate the need for ad hoc code per application to communicate with servers that communicate in a well-defined way. So the goal was you don't need special code to talk to server X or I or Z, but because you define your structure. eventually, the specification was extracted from that data adapter and made a real specification in, or 1.0 was released in 2015. What I find awesome about this is that they were solving real-world problems in creating the specification. They were getting their hands dirty and not creating a specification in some back room of an office, but doing it, creating solutions for problems, and then having a specification. I think that's the best way to go about it, really, because otherwise you end up with bloat or unnecessary stuff or things you might not have thought of. So, in short, a specification is only really viable if people are using it. You can't really reap much benefit if you're the sole implementer of a specification. I mean, yeah, we have a specification, but if you're the only one, then meh. There's quite a few companies using it publicly, ignoring the fact that every up-to-date Drupal installation is a potential JSON API server. So, for one, Netflix has published a JSON API serializer in Ruby, so they're probably using it internally. Fitbit uses it for their friend's web API, and an ex-employee of Fitbit did a presentation a few years back in how JSON API helped Fitbit smoothing out inter-service communication, because you had different teams doing different parts of the services that Fitbit used, and really helped them focus on the right problems. G2 Crowd used it for their data API. Apple actually uses it for their store, for store automation, so developers can automate their development cycle for iOS apps. And KFC UK is currently building a new Drupal site, which uses Drupal as a JSON API server for the new front end. So I've heard. So on the side of JSONAPI.org, there are about 150 client and server implementations listed in about 20 different languages. In regards to Drupal, this means there's quite a lot of client implementations to talk to your Drupal installation in loads of different languages, which makes it easy to get your data into other systems. Of the server implementations, Drupal is pretty much the best there is right now. The most complete spec-wise in what it serves the clients. So let's talk about the specification. Basically, it works over HTTP. So the method you use, get, post, patch, delete requests, all have meaning inside the API. The API responds in JSON and has a specific content type that he needs and uses. The fact it uses just normal HTTP and nothing exotic means it's really easy to slot it in an existing architecture, where you have optimizations done to how HTTP requests are cached and served, also apply easily to JSON API. So this is an example of a very, very, very simple request for JSON API. We're asking, give me the article with ID 1, please. So we do the get to this URL, HTTP, and we say we accept the JSON API. The result is a simple JSON document with the information on that entity. So you have the attributes. In this here we only have stop the noise. We have relationships. So here we have an author with some information. We'll get back to that later, and a link to itself. So you can always know where you are at that point through the data of the API. Losing the links, so for example, the relationship for the author, the links, you can get the data for the author if you need to. So you need to do a separate request. But that's only really scratching the surface. There's quite a few features in JSON API which make it quite nice to use as a base. Next up are compound documents. Compound documents are defined as to reduce the number of HTTP requests, servers may allow responses that include related resources, along with the requested primary resource. Such responses are called compound documents. So, that sounds pretty awesome, right? I mean, you ask the server, for example, for the article, and you can get all the information for all the related resources right away. So, for example, the author, we were looking at the author of the article we looked at earlier. You can get the data in a single request. You don't see that a lot without writing your own code and making your custom API to make this happen. And JSON API does this. Because of how it's, we're going to look at how it's structured, and because it's structured so it's normalized in such a way that it's always the same, it's really easy to cache the data for the different entities that you request. Such a thing you can get the single author and that data, have that cached, and make your requests quite fast. Let's have a look at such a document. Here we ask for the articles, and we're going to include the comments. So we're going to include the comments for the article in the single request. You'll see that there's a new tag included, which will contain all the related resources. So here you have it. In the included, you find another standard resource of the type comments with ID 5 and relation to the people as an author. So this way, in one request, you can get the author of the article with all the comments. It might seem a bit weird to have a separate tag for this. Why isn't it included in the relationship, you might say? So the reason for this is that what if we're getting a list of articles, for example? We're getting 5, 10, or well, let's say we get 10 articles. And we get all the authors for that articles. Now, if we have a single author that authored multiple articles, you only get that data once. So I wrote one about JSON API, I wrote another about the JSON API. I'm the related author to those articles. My data will be in the included tag only once, because you relate by ID. So that's pretty efficient, yeah? Because why would you send the data twice or thrice? And if you nest further and further, this can get really crazy, really fast. You don't always want everything. Sometimes you just need the related author, maybe certain taxonomy should be kept on the server. In order to debloat your request, you can specify what relations you want to be included in the include parameter. So for example, here in the articles, we say we only want to bring the author in right away. All other relations for this article will now only be referred to with the ID and the link, so the data won't be.
Is this standard JSON API, or is
Yes.
this Drupal's implementation of the
No.
JSON? Okay.
This is how the standard works. A lot of the standard though is kind of optional.
Yeah,
So that's the thing. But they do describe, especially for includes, how that should work, what it should do.
Okay.
But you're not really obliged. You don't need to implement every single thing in the JSON API spec. They say you may use the tag X to do this, or you may use.
And if you specify and include, let's say that by default, if you don't specify and include, then you would include, for example, the author, but you wouldn't include the paragraphs of the page, for example. If you then say include author, does that also mean that it stops including the paragraphs, or how is that defined?
From what I know, from what I know, it's you say this is the things I only want included in this request.
Okay.
So if there's any defaults or things like that, those disappear.
Okay.
Now I know that Drupal leaves all the included data, doesn't give anything. So the default request is empty. So there's only all relations are only linked by URL and ID.
Okay. So Drupal doesn't include at all, or Drupal only includes
By default.
Okay.
And then when you use the include tag, you're going to include, for example, the user, or the author, or the comments, or taxonomy, or stuff like that.
Okay.
But later we'll have a look at that and
Yeah.
how that looks in Drupal and
Yeah,
how you can
I'm really curious how that works.
and how you can set that up also at home in 5 minutes and have a look for real. So yeah, we have included author, but this include parameter is pretty flexible. You can say, for example, I want author, comments, and you'll get the author and the comments in the included tag of the response. So
Not the author of the comments.
right now you don't get the author of the comments because that would be one step farther, where you can say where you can define relations. You can say include author, dot author, and then you will include the author of the comments. I know you were there.
Automatically do the comments itself as well then.
Yes.
So if the author is the author of the article and the author of one comment, it only gets returned once in the include?
Yeah, you get the relation, the relation document. Yeah, so with the ID and the link to
It's the
the
same ID,
related
so it's
resource,
include one.
and you have to look for that resource in the included tag. So that's a big list of everything that was included by usage of the
Yeah,
included tag.
but only once.
And only once, yeah, exactly. This does mean, on the client side, that you need to go through all the included resources and make them searchable, or make them put them in some sort of store, which is a little bit more efficient than for each included. Check if this is type author and this has ID X, because that's the only way how you can identify such a record. Sparse field sets. If you're going to get a lot of included relations, your response can become quite big, yeah, because the comments have quite a lot of information that might not be necessary. For example, let's say a comment, you only want really the text of the comment. I don't care about its stuff like IDs. I don't care about stuff like, I don't know, perhaps there's some reason there's a title field. We really don't care. That's where you can use sparse field sets. You have a parameter that's fields, and you can specify in it's like an array notation. You can specify here, for articles I only want the title and body fields, and for the people I only want the name.
What's that called? Fields, while it's called attributes in the document itself.
It's fields of the resource,
Okay.
and it's fields of the resource against attributes of that single instance, perhaps. I don't know. It was a choice that is made. So they say fields.
Here, I think it has to do that attributes are more than just fields. Like a relation can be an attribute as well, and fields are only like direct properties of the.
Here you can. This means one thing I need to tell about this is that where you author could be a person, yeah. So that would be resource people. If you have the commons author we talked about earlier, this would apply to both of them because you apply this sparse field sets to a type of document. So all people, even though it might be someone from a comment or it should be someone from an article, they all get the same set of results. Now, there's no real way to separate that based on, oh no, this one is one from a comment, I need one thing more. Now you need to do that consistently. The reason, of course, is because it's in the included tag on the bottom and you don't really have, you don't, it could be for both. Next one is filtering, and they say this: the filter query parameter is reserved for filtering data. Servers and clients should use this key for filtering operations. So basically, they say use the filter parameter, enjoy. They don't say anything about how the implementation should work. That's okay. So filtering in Drupal. Here, the filtering in Drupal is quite powerful. This does mean there's a slight learning curve. Here's a really simple key value filter, where we say, I want to filter on the field that is that value. And I want a filter that's not a field, and that's this value. It's really as easy as that. But Drupal supports two ways of writing filters. One is like the shorthand, where you use a single parameter for the complete filter. And the second is what Drupal calls the normal version, where you separate the path operator and value of the query. Basically, you do see the path is just the fields, and the operator is, well, here only equals, and the value is the thing after equals. What it does do is it gives you the possibility to use different operators, because that's not really possible in line. They fixed it like this.
You do get very long URLs.
Extremely long URLs. You do, yeah.
That's not an issue with extreme long URLs.
As long as you're not using IE6. IE6 and a limit of 1024 that you will get easily there. But
you don't have it in the browser, I assume.
Oh, you do?
You could, yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, for client-side frameworks that use it, but sometimes you might have a Node.js proxy or something between it. Could be, but it could be an issue, yeah, and then you need to be a little bit smarter or work around it. Yeah.
I think the Drupal link field has a limitation of number of characters, I thought.
Yeah, to try.
So yeah, it can be very long, and it might be an issue in some older browsers. But let's hope we don't have to use those too much. I forgot where I am. So I'm going to talk about a few things in filtering. We have the supported operators. So what can we do? What is condition grouping? Because the reason we separate it, we can do some cool stuff about and or and stuff like that. And we have a little bit closer look at what path supports. The path supports, so the selection of the fields. The operator describes how we compare something. So there's quite a lot of your operators you can use. which you just enter encoded in the operator parameter. You have the normal equals, you have greater and less than, some string comparison, which is quite handy at some points, value and set to get things between, and some no comparisons. For example, if you want to find a user starting with a name starting with a J, you just use the operator starts with and the value J, and then things are fine. It could be useful for perhaps autocomplete or stuff like that.
How do you do between? Because that requires two values?
Every condition that compares a single value works like this, but there where you need to compare multiple values, you use an array syntax.
Fair enough. Sorry, too quick.
Yeah, so you have the first name, you have a value, the operator in, and we use three values, where the name is either Janice, John, or Jeff. Yeah? So it's quite easy to use that, but this is, you need to make very short field names, yeah? So condition grouping. We have a lot of awesome operators, but well, an operator without grouping is a bit useless. Because let's try this. Show me the users that have the job developer and have the first or last name Smith. Mm-hmm. So okay, we need to do multiple filters to get this really. So how do you do that? It's condition grouping. You create a condition group in the above line. You say filter for the OR group. It is a group with conjunction OR. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to make filters, and we add a new value member of. We say this is a member of the OR group, so we're going to put those between parentheses. I don't know. That's a really hard word. And as soon as you don't use the member of, it will go outside and say and. So here we have these two are grouped, so Smith or Smith. First name or last name Smith with the job developer.
So OR group is the name you've given to the group.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. The first is the first value in the filter is always a tag. If you use this notation, which means this is the way how we group these, because it knows, okay, this is a filter on its own, so we tag it like this. They need to be unique, of course, because if later we're going to do something here, you're going to override that value. So it's like a unique name you give to that filter to reference it, for example, here as a member of a to make something a member of a group. The next one is paths. Path is pretty much a field, and you can use it the same way as we used the included or perhaps the field sets earlier, where you can say, I have a property of the field career, that's name. I can always reference that through the dot notation. This could be relations or other stuff. So relations or some properties of a more complex field, for example, address field is such a field, which is made up of multiple values together. We could have an address field dot postal code, for example, or locality. Enough of this. Let's talk about sorting. Right now we're capable of selecting the right data. Yeah, we can filter, we can select the right fields, we can select the right relations we want to have, but yeah, you might need a list of those filtered items and have to use that top, for example. You need sorting. Sorting is pretty easy. You just use the sort parameter, you say sort by created. Awesome. Now the oldest one is at the top. Not very useful. So we reverse the order by just adding a minus sign before the field. One's created, so now the newest is at the top. So it's just ascending or descending. Easy. You can also sort on multiple fields. I want to sort on author first and then on the created date in descending order. You could just use a comma. Easy as that. You can also use either relations or properties of the field in sorting. So here, UID is the author, I think, dot name. So it's on the author name of the record. Drupal also allows this to make like a normal syntax of sorting. I haven't really discovered why. There's no real reason to, but the parsing of the parameters is just coded that way, so you can use this also. But I wouldn't know why you would do that.
Maybe to put them
Someone
in a
can
group.
tell me. Sorry?
If you want to put sorts in a group and then
I'm not
you
sure.
can
I
use the
don't
other
think
ones.
they support grouping, so I'm like, why?
But it looks very much like a Views export.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's consistent at least. Yeah, so that's pretty awesome. But if you need to type it, you can just use the short version. But it might be easier to have only one generator for your URLs, which might always make this. I don't know. Next up is pagination. The page query parameters reserved for pagination. Servers and clients should use this key for pagination operations. Thank you, JSON API. It's the same story again. So pagination in Drupal. A basic example of pagination is this. We're looking at a collection where links are the pagination of the set. There's three properties: self, next, and previous, which are pretty self-explanatory. And something you need to see is there is also the page limit set to 3. So every page will just have the limit 3. The fact that these links are available or are present in the response do tell you something. If next is not available, this is the last page. If previous is not available, this is either the first page. And if next and previous are not available, this is the only page. So you can get that information from the fact that they are here or not.
And the also that is counted in pages, not in items, I guess.
Yes.
Because to specify the links here, you don't really need to know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The one thing to note though is that this is the limit is up to 3. Up to 3 results. So it might be that very late in the process a node is blocked, so you don't have access to it, and then it's removed from the response. So there might be 2. So it's up to 3. It's your job to, at least for Drupal, to look ahead and say, oh, okay, I want a top 5, but I didn't get 5, so I need to look at the next page, which is a bit silly and stupid, but it's how it works. There's a maximum page limit of 50, and page count is not available in core, I must say. This is mostly for performance reasons. I mean, they did like this, 50. That sounds like a good amount. So they stopped there to make sure that you can DDoS a JSON API server really easily.
and that's the limit of pages, not the limit
Yes.
of items on a page.
The 50 a page, yes, sir. Up to 50 a page is possible right now. And page count is not available by default, but JSON API Extras does it, enables it.
50 a page, the default number of watchdog items in a page.
Yes, it's a bit.
Or the maximum number of pages.
No, items per
amount
page.
of items on a single page. So this is about what I want to talk about the specification itself. Just to have a good look at what we talked about. We talked about the document structure, so what kind of data can you expect in a response. And we have talked about how to limit your data in the response in an efficient way, so you can get just the data you need, because there's a lot of metadata in nodes you might not want to get over the API. Now, I'm gonna do something else. We're gonna have a look at getting this set up for yourself in about 5 minutes or so. So for this, there's Contenta CMS. It's a API first Drupal distribution, which configures JSON API extras, and OAuth, and a lot of stuff for you to make it easy to get a JSON API up and running. Other than that, they have a few examples. So example implementations. Example implementation in different ways. So they have Angular, Elm, Ember, Ionic, React, Vue, and Chatbot for some reason. Just examples of how you can use the JSON API to do something cool or make something. So it's really a quick start way to get your hands dirty. So what do you get for free? A pre-configured JSON API and extras, OAuth support. So your Drupal installation is an identity provider. The OpenAPI specification. If you know what do you know what OpenAPI is?
No.
It's a way to describe an API, which is used by quite a lot of tools to, for example, generate documentation. This is what they do. But also clients, for example. You can generate a client for an API through the OpenAPI specification, because it completely describes how you communicate. You get it for free. So I'm just gonna try it. Gonna have a look at setting up Contenta and.
Timer starts now.
Sorry?
Timer starts now.
Timer starts now. Okay.
Go.
I'm gonna do it on my home computer because that's a lot faster than my computer here. Laptop here. Thank you. No pressure. So the installation, you just get a SH script. Sorry. I need to fix my screen. Duplicate.
En haast even half minuut voorbij.
Yeah, it's no problem. It's that fast. So you just get a SH script. The only thing that really does is a composer creates a project, which is a git checkout of a project, and then running a composer install in that directory. I could do that, so I'll just like and then TechTalk. And so just does the checkout, does the composer install, and things are fine. This is on not on a native Linux distribution, so this is slightly slower. It's going to take 2 minutes.
It's only 10.
Exactly, and still. After you install the files, you need to configure a .env file. So that's a way to communicate some of your secrets in a way without storing it in your repository. Normally in prediction you would use environment variables to communicate this info to the system. So, just gonna open TechTalk. How we doing? How we doing?
3 minutes.
Okay, that's a challenge. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
She did your all along.
So, I'm gonna cheat Mel out. Oh, there it is. So, this was a cheated one, but okay. Oh no, there he is. So, .env we make from the example because that's mostly how these things work. We're just gonna use this because that's easy. Oh. I'm not used to using a mouse pad. This is fine. User is test user.
Just usual.
They separated the information from for passwords because that's a good idea. And the password is don't look. So there we go. So now we just run Composer install with MySQL, and it will run. And it will run the Drupal installation for this thing. This should take about 20 seconds, if I remember correctly. Okay, then I'll just open this TechTalk. TechTalk. No, API. It's done. And we have a JSON API. 5 minutes. And this was a slow one. What Contenter does is it gives you the configured server, but it also puts some test data in it. All the implementations are like a site with a few recipes and an overview and a way to view those recipes, only implemented in different front ends. So this way, if you go to the root of your API, you'll just see all the resource types you have. For now, we're just going to have a look at recipes, because why not? So this is the JSON API, the data for all the recipes in this.
In Drupal terms, a recipe is a node type, I suppose.
Yes, content type, yeah. So normally you would, if you do a default installation, it would be, the URL would be JSON API /node/recipes. This would normally be the URL. But because we are using some plugins, we can make them a little bit more friendly for the developer. Some things I want to show. For example, we want to filter on difficult, because I'm not that good in cooking. So give me a filter, difficulty, please, easy. I want easy. And that way, we only get the result, the recipes which are easy. It's really easy to understand filter like that. We talked about includes. So we have a few relationships, content type. Let's ignore that. But owner, I don't care. For example, the author. Right now, well, We don't know nothing about no author. But we could say, and please include the author. And this should add the author, which apparently is one author for all those recipes, in the included tab. Easy as that. If we go to single recipe, which is pretty easy because here we have the set of relations for the recipe, and under that we have the links. So this is the API recipes and then the UUID with a resource version thingy. Just have the single recipe now. If we look at the end, yeah, it's only one recipe. And here you can do the same things. You can do things like, I want that author. Include author. Was it author?
Mm-hmm. Author and owner. I don't know what the difference is, but
yeah, you might have someone else writing a recipe, and you, as content manager, creating the recipe in the
yeah,
backend.
but in Drupal terms, what is the difference?
No, it's a field,
It's
just a
probably
relation field.
just the same field.
Yes. It's a different field.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, different. And then you will have. Hey, here he is again, Umami. We talked about using fields, so we could say and fields. I don't know. Recipes is title. I like title. Ingredients. I like ingredients. And you just keep the two fields unique. Pretty easy. So this is an easy way to see JSON API in action. I mean, you have data, you have the relations, you have pieces of Drupal also, but you can see how blocks work. You can see how a page could work. And you could see there's a lot of things they show you here that's going to be a lot of effort to get right before you know how to use it. One thing I want to do also is have a small look at the modules they are using. So when you install it, you get a pre-installed some extras like the data and some tutorial information about where you can learn more about using this, how you should use OAuth 2 with this server, stuff like that. I'm going to log in, and I think this was like awesome. So here you see the backend. Here you have the normal content types. This is, I know where this is. My share doesn't allow permissions of files, so he's complaining about that. Here you just have the different content types that you use, and you just manage it as you always do, and they get exposed through the JSON API. But in order to make it really useful, they use the JSON API extra module, which gives you some extra ways, some extra settings. So for one, you can say, well, it's /API, and I perhaps want my count, the queries in the results. And you can do resource overrides. So, for example, if we look at recipes, there's quite a lot of Drupal fields that are just turned off, so disabled in this API, because we don't need them, or they're useless data. So let's not put them through the API. And you could use this to make your API a little bit more readable, but sometimes this might not be needed if you have same field names. So we talked about getting a free documentation. So basically, because the structure is so known, it can generate documentation pretty easily. It uses the OpenAPI module and has a connecting module that describes JSON API to the OpenAPI module. That's a key module. So for example, recipe is sorted in a really weird way. There is an issue for that. And here you have lists. And the cool thing is you have the filter, sort, page, and research version, and also just link to the Drupal documentation for that parameter. So you can easily, how did this work again, or how does it work here in Drupal? You can easily see it. One of the things that makes life also a little bit easier is the fact that you can see, okay, we're talking about recipe. It's a bit big. And what attributes can I expect? Yeah? How can I do this? Let's go. What attributes can I expect from this resource? So you can browse through it and see what's happening. The last thing is the consumers. So it uses the simple OAuth module to enable OAuth as a authentication and role management, and they support people registering and creating their own consumers. So OAuth, you have a secret and a key, and those together identify you or identify your application. Yeah? You can have people just register here and register their own keys and use this as for their different applications. Or you can say, well, here you have a secret, here you have a key, join, and do it as an admin.
So if you were to create a front-end application,
yeah,
you create a consumer in the backend and then
yes,
add the key so your consumer can connect to the API.
Mm-hmm.
So how does it work? I mean, could everyone who likes visits your site and receives the front-end application read the key and then use it elsewhere?
Well, the person who goes there goes authenticate with Drupal. So, for example, you have you could even do a client must have a user account and can log in Drupal, get key, get token, and stuff. So that's password grant, if I remember correctly. So you use username and password, for example, to get your keys. So that's the layer before you get your tokens, for example. Or there's also, you could use the application key, and I'm not entirely sure the complete A to Z for that.
Okay.
Right now.
But that's beyond what JSON API specifies, right?
Sorry?
That's beyond what JSON
Yes,
API
JSON API only specifies how we send data to each other and what parameters we use, and this installation just helps you use Drupal as a content repository. And it has a demo implementations for a lot of frameworks, so you can just get things going quick, perhaps, and just get a good feel for what JSON API is, and if it's useful or not for your own use case. But I really do think that this is one of the ways that Drupal can be relevant in the coming years still, is to do this right and become the go-to content repository go to content repository, because that's one of the things that Drupal does so well, is managing content and managing the roles who can do it and workflows around it. They should abuse that and in becoming the number one headless CMS available, I think. This is pretty much all I want to talk about, to say about JSON API for today. I mean, it's 5:09, so perhaps we're slightly tired. I am. So, are there any questions right now?
Do you currently use it in practice?
Yeah, we have multiple projects where we use JSON API. And I just disclose that using this we have made a management application for a client of us where they do. Why am I doing this in English? It's so much easier if I do this in Dutch. No one is English here, yeah?
Ik ben wel Engels, maar ik bereik Nederlands.
We have a client who does forklifts, and they manage everything from buying to repairing to making ready to sell again in a system of hearts. They have a lot of data and a JSON API also to communicate with other parts, but we need a public API. And the plan is, or the plan is to use Drupal as the public API. So say we have the private data, we will only get the data that can be public, because there's a lot of information there about how they do their work. Yeah, a lot of sensitive information. So we just move only the public data to a Drupal installation with JSON API. And you have an instant documented JSON API for their partners to use to get their data. It's really combined with something, for example, here we're going to use just to migrate API, get the data, only use the data. That's going to be public and just publish it that way to separate the private and public thing. But we do use JSON API a lot for a few other projects because it's awesome. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Ja. Dankjewel. Jan, iets lekkers.
Snoepjes. Nee, superleuk. Ik vind het superleuk om te doen. En hartstikke leuk dat jullie ook allemaal zijn gekomen hier bij ons, bij Swiss, om hier te luisteren. Fijn dat we dit hebben mogen doen.
Ja, nou heel fijn dat we hier te gast mochten zijn. Nogmaals, ik zie jullie graag weer terug op 14 november. Of op een andere DrupalTechTalk. Heb je ideeën, heb je sprekers, heb je locaties, laat het ons weten. En misschien nog even een snel drankje hier voordat de deuren op slot gaan. Dankjewel. Fijne avond.